butcher your name. So, hey, I am here with Dan Poliziani. Did I say that correctly?
Poliziani is, just like it's spelled. Yeah.
Poliziani. That's awesome. I love the name. So I found some articles on LinkedIn about coaching, constraints-led approach, and hockey. And I want to be clear with everybody. I don't know hockey at all. I mean, I'm pretty useless when it comes to hockey.
Yeah.
I do understand high flow activities, things like basketball, soccer, reciprocal teams, and things like that. But I noticed your articles were bringing together ecological dynamics, constraints-led approach, and neuroscience. And there is some tension between the communities now that, hey, perception is direct perception. And that's one side of the house that we're directly coupled to the external environment. And the other side is, hey, we're prediction machines. So I believe they can both be true. And I think what you're writing about is spot on to what I think needs to be resolved. And at the end of the day, you may not be familiar with the observe, orient, decide, act loop, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, when people look at that, they will see that both the ecological dynamics approach, the perception, cognition, action melds well with prediction, action, and active inference. So the free energy principle. So Dan, welcome to No Way Out. And I wouldn't mind if you gave a little bit of your background to our audience so they know who you are, and we'll get this thing airborne.
Yeah. Well, hockey is my background. My father was a professional hockey player back when there were 6 NHL teams and 6 American League teams, and we followed him around when I was younger. And I obviously played minor hockey in my local community all my years, and I was actually able to play major junior hockey back when you could play. The rules have since changed, and you can now play major junior hockey, which is deemed professional, and attend university hockey and get a scholarship to the United States. So I played 1 year major junior and got injured. And when I was down with the farm team, which consisted of players that were eligible for university hockey, some schools saw me play. So the following year, I decided to go to Yale University and play hockey. I played there for 4 years and then turned pro, not having been drafted. And in my first year, I lost an eye in a stick incident. I wrote one article, one of the articles called regarding how messy life can be. Mm-hmm. You had mentioned David Epstein yesterday in our conversation, and I had read about the time I had to make, I'll go back. The injury caused a pivot in my life, and at the age of 23, I was no longer playing hockey and got into coaching right away. I left early in my senior year to play in the American League. The Los Angeles Kings farm team was right in the town of New Haven where Yale is. And so I kind of let my studies slip and didn't graduate on time. When the injury happened, the coach contacted me in a hospital bed. I had 2 operations and 3 procedures on the eye. It basically left me blind in the left eye. And my coach said, Tim Taylor said, if the doctors are telling you that you're done with playing, then I'd like you to come back and finish your degree and get into coaching. And that's what I've done. That's what I do. I've been coaching well over 40 years now. I started at age 23, and that's pretty much all I've done my entire life. I got into education in the private institutions, high school loop, and it's there, at that level where I really started to experiment with and research into how to become a better coach. So that's basically what's got me here.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, yesterday we talked about the connection to Yale. I asked you if you were familiar with some of the players that I know and some of the folks that moved out of there. And let me just, for our audience, Keith McCullough, who runs Hedgeye, was a captain at Yale for several years. And in fact, it was through his morning macro brief show at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. He always talks about books and he talks about coaching. And he brought up David Epstein's new book, Inside the Box. We'll have David Epstein on this podcast here soon. We're looking forward to that.
Fantastic.
But what I like about Coach McCullough's approach is he's taking what he learned from hockey and complexity theory and all the greatest theories that are out there, trying to apply it to the market, right?
Yeah.
And he's doing a great job with that. So a nice little connection back to Yale. And last year I took my girls up to Connecticut to go to a Yale basketball camp there.
Hey. And
They're actually here at a camp. We're here in Pennsylvania at the moment. They're at a camp not too far from here. And I just want to start off with this. We dropped them off the other day, and the coaching group leader got up and started talking about how much time the coaches have in D1 basketball coaching and how they all come from the same place. And I'm like, I wouldn't brag about that. I'm not saying anything bad about it. I'm just saying we need to look outside. You can't determine the character and nature of a system from within. You got to look outside. And I think that's what you've done, is you've looked outside to bring ideas into coaching. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, as I said, when I'd come back to Canada after spending 9 years at Yale, and I got into junior hockey, tier 2 junior hockey, which is a level below major junior, which is a level consistent with NCAA and a level below pro hockey. And at that level, I didn't have a teacher's certificate, but they, in an academic environment, you're always asked to find ways to improve your ability to teach and coach. And Mike Sullivan, who had made a presentation about development at the high school level, said that, as coaches are teachers, and as such, it's our responsibility to leverage what we know about the brain and about how people learn, how children learn, and bring that to the sport of hockey. And I can recall coming upon a paper written by Richard Light back in 2012 on game sense. And what attracted me to it was a piece in there that he discussed how to shape drills. And that's very consistent with, ecological dynamics and constraints-led approach, where a coach's responsibility isn't to just run drills. His responsibility has to shift to changing the environment such that the athlete is learning, is self-organizing based on what the environment is providing. And that really piqued my interest. I mean, the loss of an eye early in my career, and the doctor's explanation to me was very much about plasticity, how the brain would reorganize, the neural networks behind my eye would reorganize and become stronger. And so the lack of depth perception and the lack of balance and, all that proprioception type of thing would get better. And my right eye, my good eye, would get stronger in time. And I kind of took all that information into account and tried to, to push further into hockey development, knowing what I know about plasticity and what a dangerous thing it can be, what a wonderful thing it can be, but what a dangerous thing it can be in terms of, drilling in a blocked fashion rather than random variable environments, and the information that the athlete is myelinating. Mike Sullivan spoke about the talent code, and is it Eric Anderson's 10,000 hours, and there's some good and bad in that study.
Right.
But I took to more the random variable environments and creating atmospheres where the athlete has to self-organize.
So is it safe to say that the constraint of having vision out of one eye only forced you to understand more about how the brain works? And that led you to understand a little bit more about the complex systems. I don't think they called it that back then, but dynamical systems thinking, and see that if you apply what we know about the brain, or what we think we know about the brain, to organizations, such as a sport team, you can actually build a better, high-performing organizational elite team. So can I say that? Is that true?
I believe that to be true. I mean, talent and skill is really the combination of a technique and its response to the environment. It blocked training, sort of repetitive, repeating something until it's those neural connections are myelinated. Myelin is the white fatty tissue in the brain that reinforces neural networks. It turns, what would be a dirt road into a super highway. Just the connections, the automation of a skill. That's a good thing and a bad thing, because if we can't treat the decisions that are made in hockey, a chaotic sport, as going into the brain and retrieving a model and then applying it to those situations, because the environment is fluid. It's changing constantly. I mean, the puck changes hands every 2 possessions. So I've got it. I pass it to you. You lose it to the opposition. They grab it, they try to make a play, they lose it. So it's a very fragmented game. And I heard you talking about basketball on one of your interviews about, two separate loops within one confined loop. And that's hockey is very much like basketball in that you can't rely on a singular model, a technique, and apply it to situations. You have to be adaptable. And I think that's what sort of random variable, creating environments that are ever changing and having athletes create a library of experiences that sit inside this organ in our head and allow it to predict or hallucinate, as you mentioned yesterday as well, about what's about to happen. And the game is so chaotic. You have to rely, you cannot think. I mean, you cannot afford to think. There just isn't the time to do that in a game like hockey.
Yeah.
And basketball for that matter.
I think in all sports, anywhere. So what we're trying to get away from is the deliberate approach of prediction and active inference more towards something which John Boyd called implicit guidance control. We're learning about type 0 and type 1 cognition. We may call it system 1 thinking. It's kind of a, yeah. So we have to bypass that. And when you look at the CLA approach, constraints-led approach, they'll show perception action. The part that's missing in that, and the whole thing about CLA is to build skills, right? That those skills that people can use to adapt to a changing environment. That goes right inside the OODA loop, that goes between perception and action. It's called implicit guidance control. And actually, John Boyd called it fingertip feel. How do you build through experience? And we're leveraging things from naturalistic decision-making, Gary Klein and others that say we have to build that experience up to have that ability to adapt to change and see novelty in the environment. So all we're saying here on this podcast and on this show is within John Boyd's OODA loop, that implicit guidance to control pathway is absolutely critical when it comes to building high performance. And that's what you're saying too. And that's what the CLA is saying as well. We need to build those skills up.
Yeah.
The second thing we say on here is, there's a technical skills and there's a non-technical skills. The non-technical skills being the teaming skills. And that's what we focused on with the flow system. And I'm just sharing that out with our listeners so they understand that these are not different things. We're trying to describe how a living system interacts with a changing environment. And CLA looks at one piece of that and says, this is what the coaches need to know. And I don't disagree. We actually 100% agree with it. And there's more to it too, right? There's the active inference part, the predictive processing part, the things that actually connect. So I love what you're saying because you're breaking it down. So coaches, and I have a reason for doing this. I have 2 girls that play basketball and their coaches do not use CLA. And their coach, and I'm going to be brutally honest here. You brought it up. Coaching is leadership. In fact, leadership is coaching. That's what we bring up from the science of teamwork. Coaching is leadership means that leaders and coaches need to read. They need to look outside their domains and they need to find out things and bring them in. Yeah. And if you're not doing that as a coach, you're not a coach and you're definitely not a leader.
No,
right?
It's a real challenge. And there are a number of challenges in hockey specifically. As far as I wear 2 hats. I wear a mentor's hat in an organization, AA organization, where I'm instructing, I'm trying to guide or instruct the coaches on how to coach to do exactly what we're talking about here. But the pressure or the comfort in falling back on the ways that we were all coached before. I mean, that's our comfort zone. We're all going to fall back on that if given the choice. You're right. Coaches don't pick up books and hockey organizations typically are closed systems, and entropy, the loss, the degradation of knowledge is like the Chinese telephone game. I say something to you, you say something, so it just deteriorates. And so, and then there's some pressure with regards to the way it looks. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about asks a coach to step back and allow learning to occur, allow failure. So we have to create these safe environments where failure, which is information, is recorded constantly over and over and over again. And that happens in such a dynamic, as you mentioned, in such a dynamic fashion. I have to make decisions on how to possess a puck based on my surroundings. But so do my teammates. They have to look at me and go and ask whether or not I have the time to make a play, if I have the space to make a play. They have to perceive that as well. They have to make decisions on whether I'm complete or incomplete. Complete and incomplete meaning, do I have eyes? Am I visually aware of where my teammates are to make a good decision, to make a play? Or am I facing the boards and I don't have that capability? Now the opposition is doing that too. You mentioned the two basketball teams. They're making decisions on that as well. The more opportunity you have to make better decisions to outnumber an opponent, more opportunity you have to possess a puck. The more opportunity you have to possess a puck, the more opportunities you have to score, and so on and so forth. So you're right. It is much deeper, and it does involve much more than what's going on in my brain. It has to do with what's going on in our unit as a team in terms of a cohesive understanding of the environment.
Yeah, you might like this, Dan. The environment, you're talking about that now. In the early 70s, mid-70s actually, John Boyd had it in his interview, leaving the military, leaving the Air Force, and he actually talked about this. He said, I'm your environment, you're my environment, right? And you just brought that up, right?
Yeah.
So how do you create the conditions that the kids, and we're talking about kids here for the moment, they can attune their attention towards the things in the environment that matter, right? That's hard to do. And in aviation, we call it situational awareness. It goes back to World War I.
Situational
Level
training.
1.
Yeah.
Understanding what happened, understanding what's happening now, and then projecting what could happen next. And I think in the game of hockey, you really have to project what's happening next, because that you said every 2 seconds the puck is changing hands.
Every two possessions.
Two possessions. Okay.
I have it. I make a play. It's gone. It's a highly fragmented game. Chaotic. It's chaos. So how do you make sense of chaos? You have to train in it. Is there a pattern in chaos? Ultimately, I doubt it, but you'll begin to pick up cues. If you're immersed, if you train in chaos, you'll begin to pick up cues. Your brain can identify and predict, okay, I've been here before. This is what's likely going to happen. Now, I can't actually think those things. It has to be instantaneous. And that's
you have to experience it, right?
Absolutely.
You have to experience.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know a lot about hockey, how they train and all that. And I've had conversations with Keith about this and folks around him that just said the same thing. It's such a closed system, like you brought up. And when we talk about other high flow sports, even in football, not being as high flow as basketball, soccer,
it's a lot more
hockey.
Controlled. So
it's centralized control. There's offense, there's defense.
Yeah.
It's not a reciprocal sport, and it's okay. It's by the way, baseball's at the other end of it, which is baseball's not really a team sport. It's a group sport, but there are high level of interactions happening, which means you do that. What we're talking about still applies, right? We're not saying don't play baseball. We're just saying different things are happening there, and more technical, I'd say.
Yeah.
So where I'm going with this is the idea of line training, muscle memory, which was brought up in aviation, thinking that we need to build muscle memory, right? That's you got to do the same thing over and over. You got to dribble the same way. You got to do the same line thing. You got to do warm-ups the same way. That's all bullshit. That's all gone.
Yeah. Well, there is. I'm not saying when I said a coach has to step back and allow a drill to teach the athlete. I'm not saying that we're not coaching. In fact, a lot of the coaching comes in the organization of creating that environment. That's the new role that ecological dynamics is suggesting for coaches. But there is time for technical technique, the development of technique, and the myelination of specific skills like bouncing a basketball. If I do that, for 30 minutes of every practice, I'm going to automate that skill. But that doesn't transfer well into chaotic environments. And so, when a player comes back out of a drill and into a line, maybe an assistant coach could be there suggesting, a technique or suggesting what he might, or even ask him, better yet, ask him what he saw and what he might do differently so that he actually engages in the solution rather than just being told what to do. And I think that's
key. That's key, because you got to get buy-in.
That's absolutely key. Questioning and engaging and reflecting and video analysis after the fact so they can see, what's going on and maybe what to look for.
Let's talk about that. Okay. That's debriefing. That is critical too. So this is one thing I think is missing in CLA is effective debriefing. I just went through Rob Gray's new book, by the way, just to look at it. He points out some things that are pretty solid.
Is that on memory? His new book on memory?
Yeah. It just came out in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
He challenges the neuroscience perspective. I'm okay with that. We need good challenges, and we can't just always assume the same thing over and over. But what he points out there is he's getting into team science and teaming and things like that. And he's getting into recounting what happened and some good practices. And we use good practices, by the way, not best practices, because if we had best practices, everybody, the dominant approach to coaching would always be here. It would prevail. So we're always looking for good things, better practices. Anyway, the idea of debriefing and having the kids and players look at what happened through multiple perspectives, which could include video, because we want, and what we're trying to do there, in my opinion, is build that sense making up, that situational awareness, that third level essay. What happened? Can you recount what happened? Did you see this rotation of the ball? Did you see that? What are they attuned to in the environment? By the way, in fighter aviation, this is exactly what we built up through the world of debriefing, is that attunement where do we put that attention? Yeah. What are you looking at when we're flying? Yeah. What are you seeing? What are you noticing? Yeah. And we build that up through debriefing, but we can only do that if they have the experience to do it from, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So you can't talk about not having an experience like, hey, we watched a game we weren't part of. Did you notice? It kind of works, but you got to put them in situ so they can experience it, so we can talk about it from multiple perspectives. And chances are, as a coach, you're not seeing everything anyway, right?
Right. True. Yeah. Right. You'll find. So, we always watch it's played, and our gut feeling was that we didn't play very well. And when you watch it back, it's actually we did. There was some things that happened that were out of our control that actually led to our believing that, but that's not the case. Anyway, we spoke with Rob Gray last week. We had a Zoom call with him, myself and the head coach at York University. And I told him, we spoke about the problems of that we were encountering with university men, players playing the game age 20 to 25 who had developed in a system where they were told what to do all their lives. And they said, how do we overcome those habits where they want to be told what to do when we're trying to immerse them in an environment where, one, they're still developing and need to develop, but where they have to, figure things out on their own and sort of create this library of experiences. And I suggested videoing our practices such that they can look at what we're doing in practice and then relate it to game situations to the point where we're on the bench in a game and go, there's the step out drill, so that they associate what we're doing in practice with what we're doing in the game. And he thought that was a good idea. He believed that, allowing them to see and question them about what's happening, what might happen, or what problem we're trying to solve in certain drills would help with sort of their buy-in to the to sort of ecological dynamics and game sense mentality.
Dan, I'm going to share something with you, and then I want you to build on it. So in corporations, when we use what we call the flow learning lab, where we take them into a simulation, we immerse them into an environment, we co-create value. Generally, the first thing before we even get to that, people want to know, what exactly are we going to do? And my response is like, I don't know yet, because I haven't seen you guys work yet. Right. So it's kind of messy, and most leaders don't want that. They want to know what's going to happen at 9:30, what's 9:45, 10:15. What do we do at this point? And I'm like, well, I don't know, because I haven't seen you guys work yet. Right.
Yeah.
So we start off kind of sloppy, and then about 30, 40 minutes into the immersion, they start to buy in. And when we do debriefs after a 10-minute simulation, they make the connection to what they just experienced to their day-to-day work. And that's where they get to buy it. And that's when this accelerates, as they go, wait a minute, we're not doing any of these things you just showed us. And we have these biases, these heuristics, these things that we're implementing, these poor meetings, these poor decision-making processes. We don't do debriefing. We don't do any of the things that you're showing us. We need to fix that. That's different than telling them you need to plan, you need to brief, you need to execute, you need to debrief, you need to do it this way. You need to experience it to find out that you're making the connection to your day-to-day work. And then you get to bring that forward, and now you got buy-in.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well,
so that's what we do.
Yeah. I'll put on my mentor hat again. Coaches are getting anxious around this time because they want to, start their yearly plans, and, they want to just talk about what systems they're going to use, and, who's going to occupy special roles in special situations during the games. And I want to caution them that how can you plan something that you don't know is going to happen? How can you plan the year out? Where what I want them to do is, start with some simple principles or rules of thumb, so to speak, loose guiding principles where the players tell them what they need to do in practice rather than, I want to spend 20% of my practice on defense and 80% on the forwards and maybe a little bit of time with the goaltenders. Like you said, you really have to, I don't know what your team is going to need. You're going to have to discover that and let them tell you what you need to do. And then the hard part is designing practices because they don't have, we're asking the players to go out and experience this. And yet I feel hypocritical in that I want to give the coaches a library of drills to use. And they don't understand that. They don't know. They have to experience that as well. And all of this learning that has to occur takes time. And the real dilemma is the measurement of it. How do you measure the success of the learning that's going on in a random variable environment? It's really hard to measure, except to say, ask a player, here's a situation where if you had a scanned to know what your options were early or how much time you had, did you scan this time or didn't you scan? Measure those types of thing where they're trying to take in with their senses the information that's available to them. It's a real difficult proposition.
Well, I think there's solutions to that, and I wasn't expecting to go there with you on this, but from Gary Klein, he has a situational awareness card that you can stop and use, and we have narrative approaches to capturing what's happening. So there are red teaming techniques, and it's interesting. I just wrote something on that this morning about red teaming being a constraint, and red teaming is just how do we mitigate cognitive biases, enable critical thinking? How do we find the best, look at the best idea, regardless of who gave that idea, right? So there are ways to do that, that we can implement with coaches. And I want to bring up something here. If you brought me into a hockey organization, I have zero hockey knowledge, right? But I have value in coming in there to talk to the coaches and have that conversation go, because they're the subject matter experts, right? They know how hockey works and all that, but they don't necessarily know how this works, right? So what we're trying to do is you coach the coaches. And it's not necessary that the coaches that are coaching your coaches have a background in the game itself. Because I'll be honest with you, fighter aviation is the ultimate skills development approach, right? Hands down, the best way, if you borrow ideas from that, you're going to develop the best skills possible. Don't look at the domain and say, we can't learn anything there. Look at the process that got us to build the high-performing teams. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm getting at. So I want to talk about parents here for a moment, right? Because they have a say in this. And I think there's this very important saying that we get, or an idea that we get from the Toyota production system, Ono and Shingo, and that is control its outside in, bottom up. It's hard to change a system from within, but if you look at it from the outside, if you put parents in charge of this and saying, we demand that our kids be trained the same way we want them to learn in school. We want that brought into the way they learn on the court or the ice. So let's talk about parents for a moment. If you're watching sloppiness, which CLA probably looks pretty sloppy to coaches or to parents, the baskets aren't going in, they're throwing interceptions or passing the ball away. How do we bring the parents on board so when they see this, they know that there's learning happening?
Oh boy, I just wrote an article called First Step, and I sort of thought, parents don't instruct their children how to walk as infants. They clear a room and they make sure that there isn't, anything dangerous for them to, fall and hit their head. They create safe environments for the child to fail. And yet as soon as you put them in a rink, you want instruction. We're comparing. Hockey is an expensive sport, and it's a huge investment for parents. So, we have leagues with levels, single, double, triple, that parents compare their child to. We equate our success with wins and losses, things like that. And you're right. It's difficult to get them to think differently about development and have the patience and the love to allow their child to fail They want to correct things right away. They want coaches to tell their child where to stand. They want their child to be able to, to carry a puck down the ice and get a shot on net. But that's not easy. And if we just treat the development in sport, specifically hockey, as we treat, creating a safe environment for a child to learn how to walk. The constraints are the texture of the floor, going from carpet to linoleum, or the amount of space from one piece of furniture to another. Those are all constraints that the child has to deal with and learn on their own. We want to grab our hands and twist their bodies so that their legs pivot into place. But that's not the best way that children learn. That's not the best way for a child to learn.
We all want training wheels on everything. And let's talk about that, because I grew up riding a bike with training wheels, right?
Yeah.
And that's the dominant approach here in the US anyway. We were fortunate to live in Germany. The girls were little, and we saw these balance bikes out there. We're like, what is that?
Yeah.
Right? So if you're not familiar, our listeners, if you're not familiar with the balance bike, it's just what it sounds like. It's a little bike with little tires and no training wheels.
No.
And the kids use their legs to balance, right?
Yeah.
So they push off. There's no pedals on it. And what happens is they learn to balance on that.
Yeah.
So it's a constraint-led approach of thinking, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we brought them, the girls were young and they didn't have a bike with pedals until we brought them to the US around 3 or 4, I think, when they turned 3 or 4. Within, when they were big enough, we got them bikes that had pedals, never had a training wheel, and you just put them on that, you push them forward and they just ride.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing. While the other kids are struggling, they're for another 2 years on riding, with training wheels, our girls are riding around, right? That is a great example of what we're talking about here, is the dominant approach to riding a bike had training wheels.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the balance bike,
same concept, learning to walk. There's a period of consolidation where all that learning, actually, there might be a lapse where they fall back to just crawling around. That period of consolidation is similar to what we experience with our hockey players. We're noticing that in the drilling, in this dynamic, chaotic environment, random variable self-organization, that it remains messy and it frustrates. There's a cognitive cost to the messiness and the chaotic nature of training. But over the summer, it's almost like there's a period of consolidation where the brain, as when we sleep, starts to consolidate everything it's experienced during the day. And, like waking up in the morning with a solution, or in the middle of the night with a solution to a complex problem. It continues to work on these problems. And I, there's no way, I'm not sure how you teach a child balance, but at some point it becomes consolidation occurs and automation occurs. I haven't ridden a bike in 10 years, but I can still get on a bike and make my way. There's a consolidation period that I think is really important, and a patience that is even more so.
I'm hearing this from you. So it's not a linear 1% improvement every single day. It's nonlinear.
No.
And this is important.
Right.
So there's some concepts I learned many years ago. One's called punctuated equilibrium. It's just boom, things happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's in nature. You get into phase shifts, that could happen. You get into attractors where you can be stuck in an attractor. And we could talk about this in mental health. And then you get a fast shift. So what you're going to see as parents and coaches is that consolidation period where you're not seeing any improvement.
Right.
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 And that's probably where most coaches and parents give up. Go, we can't do this. Well, guess what?
Or they add more teaching and more instruction and more.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is normal. So let me give you an example from my world of coaching corporations. They love what we show them. They walk out the door, they're excited. And then 3 months later, in that 3 months that usually passes where they don't ask for coaching, they realize that they need coaching all the way through, right? And so they see a rapid increase in their ability to do things immediately when they leave a workshop or a training program, and it stays flat. And then all of a sudden it goes back down. So this is I forget, there's like the normalization of deviance. There's many concepts that support that. So again, what we're saying here is it's a nonlinear progression that you're going to see. You're going to see moments where nothing's happening.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's how the brain actually works too, right?
exactly. It's got to, making sense of the chaos is just taking slice after slice after slice of experience and, you know, learning how to, or understanding that it's that the prediction ability of the brain will eventually come up with something close to what the answer is. And even if it's wrong, and likely is wrong because of the fragmented game that it is and the chaos that's going on in a game of hockey, you're getting closer and closer to the appropriate reaction to chaos.
There's one thing I read in Rob Gray's book, and there's a basketball player out of Michigan. I can't think of his name at the moment, but ADHD. So there's a lot of children that are now on the spectrum or being diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And it doesn't mean where I'm going with this is CLA actually addresses this because it creates the environment, and there are many papers on this that you change the environment.
Yeah.
And you change the behavior,
Yeah.
right? You get what you need out of it. You can't demand your kids to do something. And I want to bring up something else for our listeners and you. The idea of mission command has been around for many, many, many years, right? Mission command is just building self-organizing teams through intent, giving them the teams the intent, give them the what, but not explaining the how.
Yeah.
There's that aspect of it. And then you talked about this earlier. Leadership is more about creating the conditions, leading like a gardener. And for those of you who've read the book Team of Teams, you're familiar that Jerome McChrystal wrote that in his book, that we need to lead like gardeners. That's what CLA is. You take the things around, the constraints around the garden, and you let it grow. Right. So this is not anything new. This is mission command. This is leading like a gardener. This is setting the conditions, creating psychological safety, which is not about saying it's a psychologically safe place. It's actually creating the conditions through actions that leaders take, vulnerability, fallibility, telling folks that I did something wrong, which is difficult to do. So what we're talking about here is nothing new. This is just the way people best we know people learn, right?
That's the first thing when I was asked to come in and mentor a group of coaches, I came in and said, this is going to fail. I just want you to know, I turned down this job because this is going to fail. And here's why, here are the challenges. And I went through all of them. And I just think changing the perspective of coaches is such a hard thing to do when coaches are turning over as often as they are from year to year, when you're getting coaches with very little hockey background and very little foundation of knowledge in hockey, what to look for when you're watching a game, a modified game, shrink the zone, move the nets, play a modified game. What are you looking for, or what are you looking at that you might want to correct? How do you teach support? Or, if you notice that possession is something that they're struggling with, or getting a shot on net is something they're struggling with, how is it that you're going to come up with creating an environment that'll address that? That's not an easy proposition because of because most coaches are volunteers. I mean, now in the AAA centers, they're all getting paid to coach, but most coaches are volunteers. And like you said, they don't pick up books, and they aren't introducing new information and new evidence about learning and all these things that we're talking about.
You're going to love this. We had Sue Enquist join us early on in No Way Out, and she's the winningest NCAA softball coach, I think.
Yeah.
She was working with our Olympic team.
Okay.
Well, I met her through a flow program from Stephen Kotler, and she brought up what you just brought up, which is any chuck in the truck can be a coach here in the U.S., right? It doesn't take much. If you look, and I'm going to ask you this about hockey in a moment, but if you look at what's happening in basketball, Europeans are starting to dominate, and why? I don't know why, but you look around, they have to go through, the coaches have to get a certification in some type of coaching, right?
Yeah.
They have to know something at all levels.
Yeah.
And a lot of places,
it's basic.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But here in the US, what do you need to be an AAU coach? Maybe a background check and a little knowledge of even concussions. They have to learn a little bit about that now.
Yeah.
But in Europe, they're almost mandating in some places that things like CLA need to be understood by coaches. here in the US, I can't get an athletic director to buy into this because it's,
Yeah.
well, it's unique. The coaches aren't going to do what they want to do. And I'm like, it's your damn job to help shape the conditions.
In the sport of hockey, it's a little bit different than that in that, Canada used to be, the dominant country in that sport. It was our game, and the other countries have started to catch up. And John Lind is doing some interesting stuff in Sweden. He's the director of education and development in the Swedish Ice Hockey Association. He's looking into things like biobanding and into the problems with early identification of talent. In Canada, we have a draft that's based on birth date, and obviously someone born early January is going to be a year older than a child born in mid December. And who's going to benefit from that? And who are the kids that we're identifying as elite or the best of their group are likely going to be the kids that are a year older because they're mature. They're a year more mature. And he's trying to introduce an idea of biobanding by grouping kids by their physical maturity and their physical development rather than a strict age category, which is really interesting. And a lot of the European countries are doing that. They very much have bought into sort of play practice methodology, ecological dynamics, keeping as many kids involved as possible for as long as possible, because it isn't the early identified kids that are making it to the highest levels. It's actually the late bloomers. So we talk about being patient and allowing time for these things to develop. I associate David Epstein's Range book. I don't know if you've read it. Sort of why early specialization is going to be overcome by late bloomers. I associate that with the sampling phase of child development. Ages 4 till 12, where it's encouraged that they play multiple sports because the brain, the cerebellum, at the very base of the brainstem, is the first thing to develop. It's the mini brain. And that's the center of athleticism. It's the use it or lose it phase. The sampling phase is the use it or lose it phase, where if you're not climbing trees and jumping over rocks and playing 3 or 4 different sports when you're growing up, the brain begins to prune. There are 2 major blooms of gray matter and synapses in the brain. One is in early infancy through that age of 12, and then another during adolescence, where the brain is overly populated with neurons and synapses. And we have to diversify our use of in the earlier ages to become more athletic, because the more athletic you are, the more transfer there is to the particular sport that you end up choosing. So I'm not sure if that answers any of your.
No, it does. It's cross-referencing is critical here. So if we don't have that exposure to that, and then let me give you an example. In academia, you have experts that know their domain vertically, right? They know their depth, but they don't know across.
Right.
And when you look at things now, you need generalists to adapt to a changing environment, which is happening all around us. And you're starting to see that. So even this world of AI, and this is important, and this is a connection I want to try to make, is for our kids to perform well in the environment that we expect is coming with the world of AI, where they need to be really adaptable. My view is they need to be learning this in sport just as much as they're learning it in the classroom, and they're not. And that's why I really want my girls to learn from coaches that understand CLA, not because I want them to play basketball, because I want them to be adaptable to a changing environment. And I want to be really clear on this. It's not about going to D2, D1 school. It's about preparing for an environment that's going to be full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
God, yeah.
That can be accomplished through CLA. And of course, CLA is going to change the more we learn about it, right? I mean, it's not a panacea by any means. It's a direction that I think coaches need to go and make it their own.
Absolutely. I mean, one other thing I wanted to mention was a study that Dan Siegel did. He was studying mirror neurons, the sort of the seed of empathy. You look at a sad person coming into the room and you're not going to joke with them. You're going to understand socially, in terms of our social education, you'll understand that they're upset. It's the seat of empathy. hockey, any player playing a sport, I mean, visualization is one thing whereby neurons fire. If I'm watching you take a basketball shot and focusing on that, the same neurons are firing as I'm watching you, not as accurate as you would as actually taking the shot, but I, it's important to encourage the players that are standing in line waiting to go to watch and identify the danger of a situation or the emotional charge of a specific situation in order to be able to adapt when they're in those situations, understand a sense of urgency, understand all the things that go into making decisions that are emotionally charged as well as, tactically important. I don't know how that relates to what you were asking me, but I wanted to get that. I wanted to.
No, it does. So just by observing, you can learn a lot, but you have to know what you're paying attention to. And that's a coaching thing too, is, there's discipline involved in, from my experience watching the girls practice and watching anybody else, is it's better to learn from others because you don't have enough time to make the mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So same thing in naval aviation. We called it the gouge. We would learn from others. We would have things passed down, and you watch how other people respond to an environment, and then you would take that in, and you learn faster.
Yeah.
What ends up happening in most organized sports, even AAU basketball, is the kids aren't even paying attention.
No.
Even when they're part of a 5v0 or on-air drill, they're not paying attention, which is probably the worst thing you should be doing anyway, is put them on an on-air drill, right? Which means there's no perception action coupling, no coupling to the environment.
No.
It's just them running a drill over and over.
Yeah.
So let's build on that. So if you're running a drill and there's 7-8 people on the sideline watching people run a drill, they're going to get bored too, because there's no coupling going on there. There's nothing happening. So it's like a double whammy. You're not learning anything. They're not learning anything in the court, and they're not learning anything on the sideline. A better approach is to have them observe. Even I do this with the girls when I watch basketball. What did you notice about that pass? I don't know, Dad. Okay, let's pay attention to how they're doing that, because then they start to see things, right? And this is critical. That's what that looks like,
yeah.
Right?
Well,
or that's what that situation looks like.
I mean, there's a cost. The brain uses 20% of our energy.
Right.
It's a pattern recognition organ because it needs to save energy.
Yep.
When necessary. And so redundant, repetitive drills, the brain just filters, it just turns that out. The brain wants to recognize novel things that are new, things that are dangerous, things that are, that need to be attended to. We drive to work every day, and I doubt we can recall anything about the trip in unless, there's a pink elephant on a street or construction forced us to take a different route. Will we recall anything that happened during that time? Because the brain has to shut out certain sensory information. And that's why randomness and chaos is important, because there's a lot of newness to attend to. So that sort of speaks to what you were just talking about. I think the digital age, kids get answers right away. Anything they want, they can get the answer. And that's problematic because it transfers over to sport. Hey, is the coach going to come in and talk to us in between periods? It said, no, he just wants you to sit with this and figure things out. He says, tell them to come in and coach us. They want answers. They want to be told what to do. And I think that's a product of the way they've grown in sport and possibly in life. We all want to come to the defense of our child. Let's have that C grade turned into an A. I'll talk to the teacher about it. There's no process in learning. There's no involvement in the process of learning and understanding, how to get better with this new day and age. AI could be a wonderful tool if you know what you're asking it, or if you know what you're inputting into it, and you know how to, Geiger out the fallacies. I mean, everything gets thrown in there. If you understand what you're talking about and understand what you're asking it, intuition favors expertise. I think Kahneman said that,
Yeah.
A bat and a ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? Intuitively, we're lazy. The brain is lazy. We want to say 10 cents. Well, that's the wrong answer. Interesting to to understand all the value of the process that you speak to.
You're going to love this. I've actually used that in corporate training several times, along with the Stroop test. And the Stroop test is something we use in fighter aviation.
Yeah, I love the Stroop test.
Yeah. So right now, I did something actually at Keith's event at Hedgeye Live, where I explained the hollow mask illusion and how our brains are prediction machines and all that. So basically, when the mask rotates around, because faces stick out, we always see the face sticking out, even when we're looking at the backside of the mask.
Okay.
So again, these are not new things.
No.
We're just saying that fundamentally, when you look at how we operate, how natural systems work, that's what we want to take. And we start to your point about artificial intelligence and distractions like the phone and all that, that takes us out of being human momentarily. We need to get back to that. And I think that's what sports can provide our kids is that moment to be back in connection with other real humans. And you can use AI to train them. And there are things that we're looking at, like polygons and things like that to help them recognize, just like we would look at a HUD, a heads up display in a cockpit, to give you that information they need rapidly to learn rapidly, right? So that's down the road, but that's going to happen. I do want to ask you this, Dan. What about the successes with CLA and hockey? What are you seeing now, if any? I think I'm not sure if hockey's really big on it. But can you give us some successes that you're seeing?
It's a struggle. I mean, I know the new owners in the Canadian Hockey League, which is major junior hockey, in Owen Sound, are ecological dynamic enthusiasts. I know that if you watch any of the rookie camps at the NHL level, you see a variety of confined space games going on, and it encourages you in that you would hope that at that level that if people see that, hey, the NHL is doing it, maybe we should be doing it at the minor hockey level and the developmental levels. But the NHL can't be a model for what we do in development with children, because they play so many games, and there's very little opportunity to practice. And because CLA and ecological dynamics is expensive in terms of the amount of time it needs to create this library of experiences, the NHL can't be a model for that. So I'm not overly encouraged that how successful it'll be. It's been a challenge at the U Sports level, university in Canada, because you're dealing with 20 to 25-year-olds. I guess I'm assuming the brain is fully wired at the age of 25 through 28 years of age. There's a lot of habit there that needs to be broken down. And we've as we discussed with Rob Gray, it's a real challenge to get them to see the value and to invest in the process. When they're looking at our win-loss record and going, boy, we better work on the power play,
So building a pipeline of CLA players might be a better approach for the long term. And if you look at the NBA right now and WNBA, and you might be familiar with Alex Sarama's story going into Portland Fire. I don't know if you're tracking any of that. But from Michigan, hopefully I get the coach's name, Rusty May left Michigan. They used CLA at Michigan. They won a national championship. I'm not saying it's correlation, it's causation. I'm just saying that happened. And then with the Mavericks, Rusty May looks like it's bringing in CLA to there based on the coaches he's hiring and bringing down there.
Yeah.
You look at San Antonio, you look at Wemby, you look at these players that are kind of cerebral. They're big thinkers into, like, I'll just call it a little bit of woo, or they're meditating, they're watching their diet, they're looking at a holistic approach.
Yeah.
So these players are kind of demanding that the CLA be brought in there. We had early indications at Oklahoma City when they won their NBA championship that they were using CLA. There's the Cavaliers. We are seeing the NBA pick up on it. And here's where I want to go with this, Dan. What's in it for the coaches? Let's say you're a young, 30-year-old coach at a high school, and you start doing CLA, and your objective is to move on to the university or move on to pro sports.
Yeah.
What advantage do you get by coaching this way? That's fantastic. I think we'll wrap it up there. But before we do, I want to ask you where our listeners can find more about what you're doing, how they can find you. Yeah, I'm familiar. That's fantastic. I'm so glad that you did write on LinkedIn. And like I said, I came across one of your articles and I called you and I just wanted to check in with you to make sure that that this would be a good fit. And then you jumped right into different types of decision making. And I can't remember what the big one was. Oh, entropy, which you brought up during this. I'm like, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on, and I'll give you the last words here. This is great. Oh, you're welcome. Thanks again, and we'll keep you on here for a moment.